I mean, language really does take us everywhere. If we think about what makes us human and what makes us be able to function differently, ultimately, it is language, first oral language, and of course subsequently written language.
How do people get to be reading ready? You don't get to be reading ready by just showing up at age 6 or 7.
Obviously, there are very important cognitive, underpinnings of reading.
And when we look at a child learning to read, we certainly see the visual side of it. Most people, when they think about reading, think about the visual side of reading because it's so obvious. There's these squiggles on the page, and that's what you're going to have to learn to put together. That's the code, or at least that's what people have thought for years was the code. But it turns out that that code has to be decoded, as it were, in terms of the sounds that are made inside of words, because those letters actually have to come to represent not the words, but the sounds inside of words. Now, those two things come together. The fact that children who have trouble with reading, on the whole, have difficulty with the smaller sounds inside of words, the phonemes, and also the fact that children who have significant difficulty learning to talk also have difficulty with the sounds inside of words, but their difficulty shows up much earlier in life. And also the fact that children who have trouble with oral language generally will go on to have difficulty with written language, even if it's more subtle difficulty later on with spelling. So those all come together to form what I consider to be an oral to written language continuum.
The listening experience of the brain is overwhelmingly dominated by language experience. Language is a powerful, incredibly powerful experiential source in the average kid.
Brains come into the world, so to speak, expecting to be bombarded with language at an early age as part of its organizing principle.
At 6 months of age, every kid who's coming along okay in every culture using every language can receive and produce every consonant and vowel of every language, even if the language they will ultimately use doesn't contain the consonants and vowels.
These early acoustic processing abilities set our brain up for how we're going to organize the incoming world.
The brain comes equipped to say a word without having to have conscious awareness of each individual sound. But when you're going to use the alphabet principle and code that word with letters, then you do have to have conscious awareness of the sounds.
You can learn to talk relatively well without becoming that phonologically aware, without really needing to break the sounds down in your mind. It's only when you hit reading that you must become aware that words are made up of smaller units.
We know that it takes initially a clear understanding that the language we hear is composed of smaller sounds. These are called phonemes, smallest unit of sound. And people say, sure, cat has 3 sounds, cat. And I can ask people all the time how many sounds they hear in big or cat, and they'll say 3, cat, big. But they don't. You don't hear 3 sounds in cat. I don't hear 3 sounds in cat. Our kids never get any practice with the sounds in cat because nature has given us an oral language that allows us to communicate rapidly, so that when I say cat, I don't say ka'ata. What the hell is a ka'ata? What I say is cat. And the minute I start to say cat, the a and the sound co-articulate or bundle together and come by the ear as one pulse of sound. Phoneme awareness is much more difficult because you don't hear the sounds. And the brain has to pull from that one verbal or acoustic bundle the 3 sounds, because the ear won't. The ear never hears the individual sounds unless we spell them out.
Children may have implicit experiences with phonemic awareness when their parents read nursery rhymes to them. And so Peter Bryant, for example, has argued that nursery rhymes are the genesis of phonemic awareness. That's the beginning place that children might naturally begin to shift to language play.
Turns out that I can't play phonemic awareness games when the words aren't in my vocabulary. I can't do it. I can't catch the syllables. I can't catch the phonemes.
Between 12 and 36 months, basically, the kids learn to talk the way their parents do. and they learn the vocabulary, they learn the grammar and syntax, and they use their minds with the language to deal with the real world in the same way their parents do.
A Dutch scientist counted the words that his child had heard by the time his child was 9 months of age. And he found the child had been in the presence of probably about 4.5 million words, of which about 500,000 had been spoken to the child. The child had actually had 500,000 words directed to him, of which about 50,000 were produced in highly exaggerated form, in parentese, where the parent is talking in baby talk to the baby, so the child maybe can follow the speech a little bit more clearly. That's before the child puts the meaning to the first word. That's massive exponential exposure. Now, you and I know families in which, at that same moment in time, a child may not have been in the presence, except maybe on the television, of 50,000 words.
And it wasn't until we began to count it up we could see over time that a given family, on the average, consistently talked more. And another family consistently talked very little.
Children who come from backgrounds of poverty are at a tremendous disadvantage by the time they actually enter kindergarten. They are lagging in skill development. Their vocabularies are dwarfed by the vocabularies of children from middle class and upper middle class homes who've been surrounded by language in very different ways.
So if you go all the way back to the language problem and say, yeah, it's causing a reading problem, and the reading problem is causing a language problem, and the language problem is causing a behavior problem, and the fact that this kid can't read and other people around him can read much better is eroding his self-esteem, making him feel pretty worthless.
The truth is that reading is one of the more complicated of the higher cognitive functions, using attention and rate of processing and sequencing and memory and the linguistic systems and the visual system, and it having to coordinate this dance that's going on. And the more complicated the translation from the orthography to the phonology is in a particular language, the more complicated this processing dance has to be within the brain.
How do we take something that has so many variables, so many possible connections and combinatorial options, and do it without having to think about it? How do we turn this complicated set of relationships into a skill, ultimately, that can be run, in effect, as though it was a computation? The key is that, of course, what we're really doing is we're taking something that is a nightmare for computation, and yet we have to turn it into, as we mature, both as language users but also as readers and writers, we have to automatize it so that we don't have to think about those details.
Laboratory data has underscored the importance of automaticity. That is, the importance of being able to recognize the letters, recognize the words, recognize so that you could attend to their use, right? Read quickly. And that is critically important, to the extent that I have to invest real cognitive energy in figuring out what that word is. I've lost the meaning of the sentence. It's gone.
Make the representation of those sound parts of words a little fuzzy. And now I'm going to slow down the ability. And also, as soon as you do that, I might say you also have a decline in processing efficiency, the ability to hear something and rapidly translate, do anything with it.
The problem with automatization is that at any step, if you've got a slowdown step, if any piece of that enterprise has a block, or you can't hold enough of the information, the whole house of cards falls apart.
Because in fact, no part of a language system operates in isolation of any other part. I mean, you wouldn't have to have much of a fault in this machine operating with high speed and this incredible processing efficiency that's required to begin to see somebody be a little slower at it or a lot slower at it.
We've got kids who, on the struggling side, hesitant, mispronounce, it takes them so long to read a passage, they can't even remember what the heck they read after a sentence, much less the passage. Yes, the capacity that goes into this print level work is far too great to give room for comprehension, for relating new to known. There's no doubt about it.